What we want to do today is we want to complete our discussion of the production possibilities curve or the production possibilities frontier and go on to different material next time, supply and demand next time. Let me just kind of refresh your memory about this production possibilities frontier. If you'll remember, if an economy uses all of its available resources and its best technology, it could produce at points along this production possibilities frontier. Of course, it could always produce under that point, less than the total amount possible. But if it does that, it's either not using all of its resources, it's not using its best technology, it's not producing efficiently. Okay? So along the production possibilities frontier is what's possible. Last time we also talked about the concept of economic growth, how that through economic growth this curve shifts outward and we're able to consume more of all goods, really. More good X, more good Y, more of both goods. How do we generate economic growth? We talked about that last time, and I'll just briefly remind you of that. What we said is, if the United States, that wasn't a very good diagram I drew right there, if the United States uses all of its resources for consumption goods only, let's say at point A, then what we'll do is we'll just consume everything that we produce right now. But that will not help the economy grow. If what we do instead is we devote some of our resources to producing consumption goods, maybe even most of them, but reserve some resources to producing capital goods, these capital goods can help the economy grow. More capital, and it's the additional capital that shifts this production possibilities frontier outward from its original point to some higher level. And so what we were talking about last time about economic growth, if you want economic growth, accumulation of capital is a good way to do it. More computers, more delivery trucks, more factories, more warehouses, and so forth. But more capital goods is the way to encourage economic growth. So what I mentioned to you is if you want the growth, you have to give up something. Here's the thing we give up. We give up consumption goods. You've got to be willing to forego, do without something in the short run, that is right now, do without something, in order to accumulate the capital goods that will push the economy to a higher production possibilities frontier. And I think finally I'll mention that I gave you guys as an example of that, not just you guys, but students at this university, students at other universities. What you are doing is by going to college, you are sacrificing consumption goods. You're agreeing to have a little bit lower standard of living right now in order to accumulate what we call human capital. And that human capital is going to be something that will push your own production possibilities frontier outward. Everybody's got one of these curves, these production possibilities curves. I shouldn't say a curve necessarily. You may just be in your head, you know, sort of walking around with this information in there. But your own production possibilities frontier, your own standard of living. Economic growth will occur at a personal level through your investing in human capital. Economists like the production possibilities frontier for a number of reasons, but one of them is for evaluating public policy. How do you know if a policy is a good one or a bad one? What economists do is they have something we call the cost-benefit approach. For evaluating public policy. Is a policy a good one? Should we build this road? Should we build a certain highway? Should we add an aircraft carrier to the naval fleet? And so forth. When we have these public policy issues to look at, what economists will do, I don't mean to say everybody does it, don't mean to say everybody should do it, but I'm saying the natural way for economists to look at these public policy issues is by comparing the benefits and the costs. You can sort of think of some kind of a scales, you know, it's out there we can weigh things with. And what we weigh is the benefits against the costs. And the proper measure of cost is opportunity cost. which is just what the production possibilities frontier points out to us and emphasizes, opportunity cost. Now, let's take an example of healthcare policy. What's a good healthcare policy? Well, I'm not going to be able to tell you that because there's too many things in there for me to understand. I'm not an expert in that field. But what economists would start asking about with this healthcare policy, what's the best healthcare policy? They would start saying, well, you know, healthcare policy has a cost. And so what economists want to do is they want to measure that cost. They want to know what does it cost. And it depends. It doesn't cost, you know, let me give you an example. There's no single answer is what I was trying to say there. Suppose that we pay for health care policy through raising taxes. We say everybody is entitled to health care or deserves to have health care, and so let's just raise taxes on people in order to get the money to pay for health care that we're going to provide through public policy. What's the cost of that? Taxes. Well, the answer is when somebody takes your money away from you, your income, in the form of taxes, when they do that to you, then you or me or anybody else, I should say, but when our income is taken away from us in the form of taxes, that means that we have less money to spend. So if there is going to be a public policy to promote health care for all, and of course it's going to be expensive, that goes almost without saying, if we take that money from people as taxes in order to pay for the health care policy, the cost shows up in the form of things that people cannot buy for themselves now. Right? Those tax dollars come out of your bank account, so now you're not able to use that money in your bank account to buy things. But we don't have to pay for it in the form of taxes. Suppose that we say something like this. We're going to have health care, but the government can't afford to pay for it. We don't want to tax people. Let's do this. Let's tell every employer, you must provide health care for your employees, and maybe some minimum amount of health care. You must provide that for your employees. What's the cost then? Well, the answer is it costs nothing to the government to tell employers they have to do this, but now the cost is shifted over onto the employers. And the employer says something like this. Gosh, that's going to be kind of an expensive thing. Healthcare costs. If I hire one more employee, that's going to cost me another, let's say, $300 a month. How could I avoid that? I hate to pay those costs. And so then the employer starts thinking, you know, I was thinking about hiring another employee, but that's going to cost me not only what I pay the employee, but it's going to cost me $300 a month for health care insurance. Why don't I do this instead? Why don't I have my existing employees work a little overtime? And if I've got, let's say, 20 employees, and each one of them will work just 20, 30 minutes a day in overtime, that would make it where I don't have to hire another employee. And now that I don't have to hire another employee, I don't have to pay those health care costs either. These employees already had, the ones that I'm telling them to now work 20 minutes overtime, they've already got health care because I'm already having to provide that. But I can, and I will have to pay them a wage if they work an extra 20 minutes a day, each one of them. But even so, I don't have to pay an extra $300 a month health care insurance. So now when we come along and we try to impose these costs of health care onto the employers, the opportunity cost is a little bit different. It's something that, first of all, strikes the employer, and then the employer decides, I'm not going to hire as many employees as before. And so all of a sudden, we have people not being hired. And so some of the cost gets passed on to somebody who says, I'd like to have a job, and the answer is, well, you can't have a job because health care costs are too high. Of course, the same analysis would apply to any sort of government-mandated cost, but here we're talking about health care. How about a third way of promoting health care for all? What we say is, well, we don't like this where the employers won't hire any new employees. That's a bad policy, and we don't like to have to take money away from people in the form of taxes because then they can't buy as many things for themselves and their families. So let's do it this way. Let's just tell doctors that they've got to provide health care for free. And I don't mean to say all day long, but let's say that out of an 8-hour day, you have to work a half hour for free for your patients. Then the doctors, you know, they start saying, well, I don't know if I like to do this. Half hour a day for free. And you know, then they start doing things like, oh boy, I'm feeling kind of bad here this last half hour of the day. I think I'm going to go home a little bit early. You tell those patients I won't be here because I'm not feeling so good. So maybe the doctor goes home. Or maybe some people say, this is a terrible thing, you know. I don't even enjoy being a doctor anymore now that they come along and just tell me I've got to treat these people in off the street. These aren't my regular patients. They're not getting regular health care. They're just sort of dropping in here. I'm having to treat these people. This is not as much fun. I don't like this. Maybe what happens is some people who are thinking about going to medical school, they just say, you know, I've heard from my uncle, the doctor, about this new policy where he's got to treat patients for and doesn't get to charge them. I don't like the sounds of that. My uncle hates the sounds of that. He's retiring a little bit early just to avoid it. I don't think I want to be a doctor. I think instead I'll go to law school. There's a better world. More lawyers, fewer doctors. I don't know when, and that's probably not a better world. Anyway, but there's no way that we can avoid these costs of a policy. If there is a policy, it has a cost. And what I'm telling you is that economists are always looking under every rock and behind every tree. They're looking to find out where those costs are. And economists can't make that final decision, this is a good policy or a bad policy. We talked about normative economics before, normative economics being where your own values are injected into this. We don't make the policy decisions, of course, for people, because the actual weighing of benefits against costs, that's up to each voter to decide how they'd like to vote. But the point is that sometimes voters don't realize what these costs are, and economists are good at pointing out costs and good at giving us the information that we need in order to make this balancing decision that a voter has to make. Of course, we need the same kind of help to understand the benefits of policies, but what I'm saying to you is that the costs are the things that are very often ignored. Benefits are not nearly as often ignored because the people who are going to get this free health care, they know about it, they're willing to talk about it. Very often the benefits are out there, but the costs remain hidden. And I'm saying to you that the first step in overcoming this is to recognize from our production possibilities frontier, every policy has a cost. There's none without cost. And even though the costs may be sometimes hidden, we've got to search those out if we want to make a wise decision, sort of balancing these issues one against the other. Everything has a cost. And I'll finally say that the political process sometimes obscures these costs. And I don't mean to say accidentally, but I mean sort of on purpose. If I'm a politician and I'm promoting this policy, this health care policy, then I want the health care policy. Maybe I'll be the sponsor of it. I'll have my name on it. It's the Tom Weyrich health care policy. It's the new policy to help millions of people. I'm a hero. So if I'm promoting this policy, then maybe it's in my best interest to not bring up sort of the negative side of it, to just talk about the positive. Oh, this is a wonderful thing. Millions of people will receive treatment. The costs, I don't really want to point those out. And so in the political process, very often the attempt is to conceal, to cover up, to at least not point out these costs. And so very often economists come along and say, hey, don't forget this. Same thing's going to be true if we talk about various things, Social Security reform, national defense policy. All of these policies have a cost. Let me use the production possibilities frontier to talk about a certain policy situation. It's now quite a few years in the past. Uh, 1960s. During the 1960s, the president, well, not all during the 60s, President Kennedy was there at the first part of the 60s, and along came President Johnson, Lyndon Johnson, his initials LBJ, who's a president from Texas, of course, near Johnson City. Anyway, President Johnson came along in the 1960s. You can think of it roughly 1965. That was sort of a big year, 1965 or so. He came along and he says, you know, we're going to do some great things. The first great thing that we're going to do is we're going to stamp out poverty. Stamp out poverty. And here I'm sort of calling that butter. You'll know why in just a second. This is the guns and butter example that is so common for people to have talked about during this period. Stamping out poverty, it's sort of like we're giving these consumer goods to people. We're doing things for poor people, and we're stamping out poverty. And we'll call that butter. And another thing is, we're going to fight a war. War in Vietnam. Guns. So we've got this sort of domestic program going on to stamp out poverty, and sort of this international program going on to stamp out communism overseas, Southeast Asia. And this was, the one was called the War on Poverty, and the other one was obviously the war in Vietnam, and we had these two wars going on. And Lyndon Johnson said, you know, we're just not going to give up on either front. We're going to win the war on poverty. We're going to win the war on Vietnam. And what he did not take into account is this production possibilities frontier. And Lyndon Johnson's whole idea was, we'll do both of these things. Well, what do we have to sacrifice? Don't have to sacrifice anything. We're going to fight both wars, and we're going to win both wars simultaneously. We're going to have more domestic programs. We're going to have more national defense programs. We're going to have it all. Well, you just cannot have it all. Once you reach the production possibilities frontier, and let's say you've got G1 and B1 units of guns and butter. If you want some more guns, if you want to fight that war in Vietnam a little more vigorously, G2 units of guns now, the production possibilities frontier says, well, it will be necessary to get along with fewer or less butter, fewer of these domestic programs. If you would like to have more domestic programs, you're going to have to get by with a smaller defense effort, or offense effort, but military effort. There's a trade-off. More butter, you want, what would this be, B2? If you want B3 units of butter, more of this, then the production possibilities frontier says you're going to have fewer units of guns, less of this defense effort. But the production possibilities curve says you can't have more of everything. Lyndon Johnson said, yes, we can have more of everything. But then when he started to promote these policies, both of them, what he found out was, oh, I'm running out of money. What am I going to do? So then he turned to the Federal Reserve, which we will come back and talk about later in the semester, and he says to the Federal Reserve, hey, we need your help. We need some more money. And the Federal Reserve says, well, you know, we're reluctant to do that. If we put too much money in the economy, that would create inflation. Inflation is rising prices. We'll come back to that later in the semester. But Lyndon Johnson says, well, we got to have more money because we're fighting two wars at once. All of a sudden, he's starting to realize, man, something's got to give. And he decided it would be the Federal Reserve that would give. And so he put the pressure on the Federal Reserve. Federal Reserve printed more money, and what happened was prices started going up. In this particular case, because Lyndon Johnson did not realize that he had to make a trade-off. Do you want more of this or do you want more of that? You can't have more of everything. Because he didn't realize that going into it, neither he nor his advisors, then they ended up in a situation where they found out they couldn't have more of everything. They put the pressure on the Federal Reserve to help out with monetary policy, and then we started getting inflation. Rising prices. Increase in price, P. And that started in 1966, and it continued on to, I'm going to say about it depends on how you count these things, but about 1980, I'm going to say 4. We entered this period of inflation, and that period of inflation was with us for 16, 18, 20 years, depends on exactly at what threshold you say it started and when did it end. But the point is we had 18 or 20 years of high inflation, and here's when it started. And it turned out that these costs, which the president did not want to sacrifice one thing against the other, these costs got turned on to us or put onto the society in just a different form, in the form of inflation. And that disrupted financial markets, it disrupted labor markets, it disrupted markets for goods and services, and the cost came out in that form. But the point is that we are not able to avoid costs. If you want more of something, you have to decide what are you willing to give up. And we hope that the answer is, the thing that's of lowest priority, right? If you've got to give something up, the thing you want to give up has the lowest priority, and that way the opportunity cost is minimized. But there is a cost, and because we did not recognize that cost, we had a number of years, and really only in the last couple of years have we begun to get over this. And so, you know, inflation is something, I don't think that we are over it. Inflation is something that's still in the back of people's heads saying, oh, that was a miserable time during the late 60s and the 70s and in the early 80s. It was a miserable time. We either had inflation or we were fighting inflation. It was disrupting the economy. And so, and I don't think we're totally over it yet. So this is something that has had a very high cost. These two wars that we were fighting simultaneously had a very high cost on our society, in addition to the costs that were obvious at the time of people being killed and injured overseas and so forth. Okay, questions about this? Let's go on and talk about something else. I wanted to talk about, by the way, this economist's approach to public policy, partly because this is the College of Public Affairs, and that being the case, then we like to talk about these public affairs issues from time to time. Let's talk about trade. And by trade, I mean trade with foreigners, trade with people in other countries. If it's within the United States or within any country, normally you won't hear it called trade. Normally it'd just be called commerce or buying and selling, you know, just ordinary markets. And when the term trade is used, very often what people mean is trade with somebody overseas, over borders at least, if not seas. Here's what I want to show you when all is said and done. Let me draw a little picture and then we'll come back to it later on. I want to show you that it's possible to achieve a point like this point A I've just drawn that lies outside of the production possibilities frontier. I just told you a few minutes ago that we are constrained to consuming goods along the production possibilities curve, and what I want to do is show you that it's possible to get outside that curve through trade. Okay, let's start off. I want to have two different countries in my example here. I'll start off with, how about the USA? What do I have here? X and Y. We'll have 100X or 500Y. So we have two goods, and the United States is, with all of its resources, it can produce 100 units of X or it can produce 500 units of Y. Let's write down a little formula here. With all of our resources, 100X, or, and I'm putting an equal sign here, but with the same amount of resources, we could also produce 500 units of Y. Let's calculate opportunity cost. I'll divide by 100. So now 1X costs 5 units of Y. That's the opportunity cost of 1X. I mentioned to you the other day you need to be comfortable with calculating these. We could also calculate the opportunity cost of 1 unit of Y. Let's divide by 500. And so now this would say 1 unit of Y has the same value or the same opportunity cost as, 1/5 unit of X. And so here are our opportunity costs for either 1Y or 1X. We've got the cost. Now let's take another country. It doesn't make any difference what the country is. Let's make this, well, what would the country be? Canada. Canada. I just had those numbers in my mind but forgot them. 200 or 400. Canada can produce more of, looks like Canada can produce more of X than the United States, but the United States can produce more of good Y than Canada. Let's calculate opportunity cost in the same way. Say 400Y equals, takes the same resources as 200 units of X, divide by 200 2y equals 1x. So the opportunity cost of 1x is 2 units of y. If you want to get, and all this is saying is, along this production possibilities curve, if you want to get 1 more unit of x, you have to give up 2 units of y. Let's do the same thing by dividing by 400. So now we have 1y equals, what, 1/2 x. There's the opportunity cost of good y. If I gave you an example like this on the exam, then I would sort of show you this curve, let's say, and then it would be time for you to get busy and calculate opportunity costs. Okay? Trade. Specialize in producing the good for which the nation's opportunity cost is lowest. This is the principle of comparative, and you know, sometimes people don't call it the principle, they say it's the law of comparative advantage. The law of comparative advantages, it tells us what to specialize in producing. You specialize in producing the thing where you have a comparative advantage, where you're comparatively the most efficient. And the way we do that, find out comparative advantage, we look at these opportunity costs. Now, let me sort of highlight this so there's no doubt what we're talking about. Here's for the United States, our opportunity costs. Here are opportunity costs for Canada. So, who has the lowest opportunity cost of producing good X? Here's the cost of 1X in the United States is 5 units of Y. The cost of 1X in Canada is 2 units of Y. In Canada, you can get an X by giving up 2 units of Y. In the United States, you have to give up 5. So Canada should specialize in producing X. The opportunity cost is lower for Canada. How about the opportunity cost of 1 unit of Y? In Canada, if you want a unit of Y, you have to give up half a unit of X, 0.5X. In Canada, in the United States, if you want 1 unit of Y, you give up 0.2X, 1/5 of a unit of X. So if you wanted 1 unit of Y, you can either get it for 0.2X, 0.2 units of X, or 2.5 times as much over in Canada. So USA specialize in producing good Y. That's what the law of comparative advantage tells us to do. Now, let's go back and do a little bit more calculation because all the information's here for us to see what's going to take place. Let's say pre-trade, if there's no trade between these countries, both countries want some good X and both countries want some good Y. They don't want just one or the other. So before trade, let's say this happens. Okay? Let's say each country uses half of its resources, half and half. Let's say each country uses half of its resources to produce each good. And so then in Canada, they would have, what, 100 X's and 200 Y's. Canada, 100 X and, what did I say, 200 Y. U.S. If we use half of our resources for each good, then we would have 50 units of X and we would have 250 units of Y. So we add this up. The total world production would be 150X plus 450Y. That's before trade, before any kind of trade. Now let's take this other example though. Suppose that each nation follows the law of comparative advantage. Each nation specializes in producing something. Canada specializes in X. The United States specializes in producing Y. Each nation specializes in producing something, and then they trade off their surplus. And by the way, make no mistake about it, once you specialize, you must trade. Okay? And the same thing is not only true for nations, but it's true for individuals. You may be able to live out in the country and, you know, like raise your own food and sort of make your own clothes a little bit and maybe make a shack someplace to live. Maybe you'll be able to do that. But if you start specializing, and let's say all you do is you grow food, you better get ready to trade with somebody, because if all you have is food, you're going to get cold in the winter, and you're not going to have a place to go inside when it's raining. If you've specialized and all you produce is one thing, you're just not able to satisfy your other needs. So once these nations begin to specialize the way that we're talking about here, they must trade with each other. Okay? So let's suppose they do that. Canada will specialize and produce. Well, if Canada, where's Canada over here? If Canada specializes in producing, what did we say? Good X. Canada can produce, in specialization, 200 units of X. 200 X plus 0 units of Y. They're specializing now. USA, if the United States specializes in producing good Y, the United States will produce 500 units of good Y and no units of good X. Total world production, let's add up. 200X plus 500Y. We're assuming that there's just United States and Canada involved in this world that we're looking at. Okay, well, now let's go back and compare. Total world production of good X, when there was no trade, just the United States produces its own X, its own Y, total world production of X was 150 units. Now, with specialization and trade, total world production of X is 200 units. It's up by, gosh, 1/3. And before there was any specialization, there were 450 units of Y out there being produced by the two countries added together. But now that we have specialization taking place, total world production, and what, only the United States is producing good Y, total world production now is 500 units of Y. We're able to get more Y, and we're able to get more X through specialization and trade. Now, I don't know the exact amount of trade. It depends on how the two countries feel about X's and Y's. If they just traded away half of what they have for half of what the other one has, then what we'd end up with is something like this. Did I make that clear to you? Let's say Canada gives up half of all of its X in order to get half of the United States' Y. Then each country would end up with 100 X, and each country would end up with 250 Y. Both countries, each country would end up with that. And you can see that 100X and 250Y, wow, the United States is doing better. Before there was trade, the United States could only have 50X and 250Y. That's when it produced for itself. Now it's got 100X and 250Y. Same amount of Y and more X, twice as much. Before trade, Canada had 100 X's and 200 Y's. After trade, Canada's got the same 100 X's, but wow, 250 Y's, not just 200. Canada's got more Y than before and the same amount of X. The United States has got the same amount of, what did I say, of Y as before and more X. Both countries are better off. And both countries, let me draw, well, here is the picture. Here's almost the picture. The United States had a production possibilities curve that looked like this. Where did I say? Ooh, someplace I drew that. 100 and 2 and 500. You know, I just missed that a little bit, didn't I? The United States is consuming at a point like this point A that I drew out here a while ago. The United States is able to consume with specialization in trade 100 units of X and 250 units of Y, and that is a point like A that lies outside the production possibilities frontier. We're not able to be out to this point through our own efforts. We can't be out at that point through our own efforts. We are constrained. If we're going to produce goods and services, we've got to produce along this curve or below the curve, but that's the best we can do. But we've found a way by specializing in producing, what did we say? The United States specializes and produces Y. By the United States specializing in Y and then trading away the excess Y for the other country's excess units of X, the United States can consume at a point beyond the production possibilities frontier. This is a very sort of technical discussion, but even though it's very technical, it's got a real common sense way of looking at it. All that we've done is this. We had a situation, let's kind of see if we can get the common sense here. We had a situation where the United States was a great producer of Y, a better producer than Canada. And we also had a situation, or have a situation, where Canada is a great producer of X, much better than the United States. And so if we specialize, each country does what it does best. Canada only produces this thing that it's twice as good as the United States at producing. And the United States only produces the thing it's much better at than Canada. So each country is just doing its very best. And then they're trading with the other. And the other country, the trading partner, has an opportunity. The United States has an opportunity to get good X from Canada, and Canada is so efficient at producing X. Each country is made better off, just as each of us is made better off if, let's say, I trade a TV set with you and you mow my lawn 10 times during the summer. Each one of us is better off. I'm not very good at mowing lawns, but I got TV sets, and you want TV sets, don't have one, but you can mow lawns. Each one of us is better off when we trade. I'm better off, I'd rather have you mow my lawn than me continue to own the TV set. You're better off because you'd rather have the TV set and mow my lawns. Both parties benefit in this sort of a situation too. We need to be able to calculate opportunity cost, though, so we know which country has a comparative advantage, and we know which country should, if it's trying to maximize its benefit from trade, which country should be specializing in X and Y and in trading off their surplus. There's nothing magical about these numbers where down here at the bottom I just said suppose each country trades away half of what it has for half of what the other country has. There's nothing magical about those numbers, but no matter how you slice it, world production of both X and Y has gone up from the no trade situation to the trade situation. World output has gone up, and it's possible for everybody to have more than before, both Canada and the United States. And let me finally sort of wrap this trade situation up by telling you something that many people believe, I'm going to tell you is not true. Some people believe this, that in trade, one side wins and the other side loses. And I'm telling you, that's not true. In the trades we just saw right here, both sides win. Now, it is true that we would like for the gains to be mainly on our side and not so much on Canada's side. But I'm saying to you, both sides win, and whatever the specific terms of the trade are, that's not the important issue. If the United States gets out here, that's great, but if we only get to that point, we're still better off. This point B, it's just a little ways beyond the production possibilities frontier. We're still better off than we were before when we had no trade. So, trade benefits everybody. Trade increases world production. Questions about this? Okay. Well, time to do a little more erasing. What we want to do is we want to talk about 3 questions that every nation must answer. And again, these are public policy type questions. This is not what a nation answers just kind of in secret. But these are policies. How are we going to handle this? 3 questions every society must answer. Number 1, what will be produced? What will be produced? You know, every nation has got to decide that. What I'm telling you here is that what will be produced is going to be at some point along the production possibilities frontier. What will be produced? Will we have a lot of X and not much Y, or will we have a lot of Y and not much X? This is pick a point on PP curve. Every nation has got to decide that. Each nation makes its own choices, but that choice has to be, or that question has to be addressed. Number one, how will the goods be produced? We're going to be efficient with our production. What are our laws and institutions? Laws, customs, institutions, etc., traditions. Suppose that we say something like, oh, we need a bigger military. How will that good, this bigger military, how will that be produced? There's different ways of going about that. They could just come out and scoop up people, you know, like one every 10th person out on the street. They see 10 people, pick up one, put them in a truck, take them out to some training station, and put them through basic training, give them a gun, put them out there in the military. That's one way of doing this. So how will the good be produced? That's one way. There's another way. You raise, through government, raise money through taxes and go out and say to people, we'd like you to join the military, and if you will do it, here's a bonus that we'll give you for signing a contract, and then we'll pay you a certain monthly payment, and then once you get out, we'll give you certain benefits then. That's another way of doing it. The same type of issue, or the same kinds of answers could be addressed. How are we going to get highways? The good to be produced is highway. Maybe we've decided to pick a point on the production possibilities frontier. We want 3,000 miles of highways to be built each year in the United States. We pick a point. We want those 3,000 miles of highway, but how are we going to do it? Could have people just come out of their homes and build a highway that's right in front of their house, just like be on a work crew, and all you would do is just work on that 100 feet or 200 feet, whatever goes by in front of your house. And so for the next guy and the next guy and the next guy. That's one way of doing it. We don't happen to do it in the United States that way, but that is a decision that each nation has to decide. How are we going to do this? What are we going to produce? And once we decide that, then how are we going to go about doing this? You know what we do? We collect taxes, and then the government says, hey, we're trying to hire somebody that'll build a highway for us out here. And then contractors come along and they bid, yeah, I'm willing to build that highway, $3 million a mile or whatever. Okay, you've got the deal, come on out and build it. And then we leave people alone that are living in their homes. We don't make them come out and, you know, and work on the crew. We could produce highways with prison labor. We could get the prisoners out of jail, you know, and just take them out here on a work crew and make them work. There's different ways to answer this question. Each nation has to answer the question in its own way. But a lot of this is laws, customs, institutions. In the United States, there are certain things that we have in our laws and our customs where that we can't imagine a situation, well, like the one I just described. You come out and work on the road going by in front of your house. We can't imagine that. I mean, you can imagine it, but we can't imagine that being put in practice. Can you imagine what that would be like? The government would come along and they would say something like, okay, come out on Monday morning at 8 o'clock and go to work. And then what would Americans say? Yeah, I don't feel like that. I don't get up at 8 o'clock in the morning. Yeah, well, you get up tomorrow at 8 o'clock and come out here and get a pick and shovel and go to work. I don't really feel like it. I need to go on vacation. No, you may not go on vacation. You must do this. You know, it wouldn't be very long until somebody hired a lawyer and then they would get the Constitution out and they would find some clause in there that says, you can't make me go to work like this carrying a pick and a shovel. I've got my own job. I've got my own business to run. I got to go on vacation. I'm sick. I'm tired. I'm lazy. I just don't feel like it. Our laws and institutions would not allow us to answer the question, how are we going to produce that highway? We just couldn't answer the question in that form or in that way. For whom will the goods be produced? Number 3. For whom? We talked about the rationing mechanism or rationing device earlier. Once we produce these goods, we have to decide who gets to use them. Who gets to use the highway? Can anybody use the highway? Well, in the United States, that's the way we run the policy, yeah, pretty much. But, you know, some highways, we have a toll booth that's set up there, and we say, if you want to use this road, you have to pay money. Other roads, we just say, if you want to use this road, just get on it and use it. We have to come up with some way to ration that space out. You know, when we just say, if you want to use the road, just use it, sometimes we have traffic jams. You don't have traffic jams nearly as often on turnpikes and so forth because we've got a price out there. The people who are willing to pay the price, they use the highway. Other people don't use it. There aren't as many people on that highway. We ration those scarce goods and services out. Every society must answer these questions. Not just market economies, but a socialist economy or communist or whatever you'd like to call it. Every single society has these questions and they must answer them. And the way they answer those goes a long way in deciding, is the economy very efficient? Does it produce modern goods and services? Are the goods and services desired by the people? You know, Russia, when it was the Soviet Union, it used to produce lots of goods and services. They just happened to be goods and services that the average person didn't want. A lot of military goods and services. And the average person just said, gosh, I wish I had like dinner tonight. I wish I had a nice apartment. I wish I could come and go freely. So how the nation answers these questions, that influences the quality of life for people, the efficiency of the economy, and its future and so forth. Let me finish up and sort of give a longer term perspective about this. When a nation comes along, and the United States has been doing pretty good with this in the last couple decades, when a nation comes along and it finds a good way of answering these questions, other nations notice. You know, we tend to think of ourselves just kind of, we're cut off from the rest of the world. We do what we do, they do what they want to do, other people in other countries. But the reality is it's not quite that simple. The reality is everybody's looking for a way to be prosperous and happy. And that being the case, nobody knows how to attain this. We don't know for certain. We have these ideas, but what we do is we look around for models. Oh, that country over there is successful. Let's do what they do. And what I'm saying to you is this, is in about the last 20 years or so, the United States has had really a great deal of success at answering these economic questions. We've got an economy set up where we decide how will goods be produced and what goods are going to be produced. We do that largely through a market economy here in the United States. And as I say, we've had a good deal of success, and so people in other countries, they start looking at our success and they say, gosh, if we want to have a successful economy, we need to start answering these fundamental questions the way the United States does. And so what we've seen in the last couple decades is a growing number of countries adopt similar practices to ours, a more market economy approach to answering the questions, and they too have been experiencing more prosperity. Let me close up by telling you of a bad story about this, though. Back in the 1930s, we had the Great Depression, more of which we'll talk about later. But we had the Great Depression back in the 1930s, and what happened was countries around the world were looking at the United States and saying, you know, that market economy didn't work out too well. They got a depression. They seem to be stuck in that depression. There's a lot of misery. There's a lot of suffering. Let's don't do what they're doing. And so the rest of the world was looking around for a model to follow, a way to success, and they decided to reject our approach. Many countries did. And then they looked around and they said, oh, socialism. They're trying this new social experiment over there in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union and so forth. And that seems to be having a good deal of success. And so right there in the 1930s and 40s and 50s and 60s, and into the 70s, what happened was much of the world was thinking that the United States model hadn't been so successful and that socialist model had been more successful. So a large number of countries around the world were more of a socialist kind of an approach toward answering these questions. And nowadays, as I say, the last 20 or so years, they've started coming around to our way, and the world economy has become more market-oriented. What we'll do next time is we'll talk about one important aspect of a market economy, and that's the way that goods get bought and sold in markets through supply and demand. So long. I'll see you next time.